You know what they say about raising children. You give them roots and wings. What they don't tell you is that sometimes those wings carry them so far away that they forget where they came from. My name is Carolyn Scott, and I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I believed that unconditional love meant exactly that. No conditions, no boundaries, no limits. I thought that being a good mother meant sacrificing everything, asking for nothing, and always being there when my daughter needed me. I was wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What I'm about to share with you happened 6 months ago, but the story really begins 25 years earlier when I made a decision that I thought would secure my daughter's future. Instead, it nearly destroyed both of us. This is about the day I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you adore is to let them face the consequences of their choices. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office buzzed with that persistent hum that makes your teeth ache. I'd been sitting in that same uncomfortable chair for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall insisted it had only been 15 minutes. 15 minutes since my world turned upside down. 15 minutes since 3 little words changed everything. You have cancer. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, to be precise. Dr. Martinez had delivered the news with practiced gentleness, his voice measured and careful, but the words hit me like a freight train nonetheless. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, trying to process what he was telling me about treatment options, survival rates, and the urgent need to begin chemotherapy immediately. Mrs. Scott, do you have someone you'd like to call? Family or friends who can support you through this? His kind eyes searched my face with genuine concern. My daughter, I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. I need to call my daughter. Dr. Martinez nodded and stepped out to give me privacy. I sat alone in that sterile room, surrounded by medical diplomas and pamphlets about various diseases, and reached for my phone with trembling fingers. Jessica's number was at the top of my favorites list, right where it had been for years. My beautiful, successful, 38-year-old daughter who lived in her penthouse apartment downtown, driving her luxury car and wearing designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I held my breath, needing to hear her voice more than I'd ever needed anything in my life. Mom, this really isn't a good time. Jessica's voice came through crisp and impatient. I could hear music in the background, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. I'm at a networking event, and it's really important for my career. Can this wait until tomorrow? My throat felt tight, constricted. Jessica, sweetheart, I'm at the doctor's office and I need to tell you something important. Is this about your blood pressure again? Mom, you worry too much about every little ache and pain. You're fine. You've always been fine. Her voice carried that familiar tone of dismissive irritation that had become increasingly common in our conversations over the past few years. No, honey, it's not my blood pressure. I've just been diagnosed with— Mom, seriously, I can't do this right now. There are investors here, people who could change my entire future. Whatever it is, we'll talk about it later, okay? I love you, but I really have to go. The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at my phone screen, watching her name disappear as the call ended, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not the physical kind of crack, though Lord knows my body had plenty of those these days, but something deeper. Something that had been holding my heart together for far too long. I called her back immediately. This time it went straight to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Jessica Scott, financial consultant at Morrison & Associates. I'm currently unavailable, but your call is important to me. Please leave a detailed message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. The beep sounded, and I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. What do you say in a voicemail? Hi, honey. Your mother has cancer and might die. Please call me back when it's convenient for you. I ended the call without leaving a message. Dr. Martinez returned to find me sitting exactly as he'd left me, phone clutched in my hands, staring at nothing. Everything all right, Mrs. Scott? I forced a smile that felt like broken glass. Yes, everything's fine. She'll call me back later. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Jessica wouldn't call back later. She'd forget, or get busy with another networking event, or simply decide that whatever I needed to tell her couldn't possibly be as important as her career, her social life, her endless pursuit of success and status. Dr. Martinez sat back down and pulled his chair closer to mine. Mrs. Scott, I want you to understand that this diagnosis, while serious, is not a death sentence. Pancreatic cancer has a reputation for being particularly aggressive, and I won't lie to you about the challenges ahead. But you're strong, you're relatively healthy otherwise, and we've caught it before it's spread to other organs. The treatment will be difficult. Chemotherapy, possibly radiation, and likely surgery down the line. But you can fight this. I nodded, trying to absorb his words, but my mind kept drifting back to that phone call, to the sound of laughter in the background while I sat here receiving the worst news of my life, to the easy way Jessica had dismissed me, as if I were an inconvenience rather than the woman who had given birth to her, raised her, and sacrificed everything to ensure her success. I'll need to start treatment immediately, I asked. Within the week, ideally. The sooner we begin, the better our chances of stopping the cancer's progression. I'm going to refer you to Dr. Patricia Chen at the Riverside Cancer Treatment Center. She's one of the best oncologists in the state, and she'll develop a comprehensive treatment plan for you. He handed me a folder filled with paperwork, appointment cards, and informational brochures. The weight of it in my hands felt enormous, as if I were holding the next chapter of my life, a chapter I'd never wanted to write. Is there anyone else you can call for support? The treatment process can be quite challenging, both physically and emotionally. Having a strong support system makes an enormous difference in patient outcomes. I thought about my sister Margaret, who lived 3 states away with her own health problems. My few remaining friends from the old neighborhood had either moved away or passed on. There was my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, but we barely knew each other beyond polite hellos over the fence. The truth was, for the past 20 years, my world had revolved entirely around Jessica. Every decision I'd made, every choice, every sacrifice had been for her benefit. I'd poured everything into ensuring her success, her happiness, her future. And now, when I needed her most, she was too busy to even listen. I'll be fine, I told Dr. Martinez, though the words felt hollow. I'm stronger than I look. He studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd delivered this kind of news many times before. Mrs. Scott, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've learned that the patients who do best are the ones who allow themselves to accept help. Pride can be a dangerous thing when you're fighting for your life. After leaving Dr. Martinez's office, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for over an hour. The late afternoon sun slanted through my windshield, warming my face, and I found myself thinking about the day Jessica was born. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It had been a difficult labor, 36 hours from start to finish, and when they finally placed her in my arms, she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Her father had left us when she was 2, unable or unwilling to handle the responsibility of parenthood. From that moment on, it had been just Jessica and me against the world. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning offices at night and working as a secretary during the day. Every penny I earned went toward making sure Jessica had everything she needed. Dance lessons, piano lessons, tutoring when she struggled. In math, summer camps, designer clothes for prom, A car for her 16th birthday. When she got accepted to Northwestern University, I took out a second mortgage on the house to pay for her education. When she graduated and wanted to move to the city, I helped her with the down payment on her first apartment. When she started her financial consulting business, I liquidated my retirement savings to give her the startup capital she needed. And through it all, I told myself I was investing in her future. That someday, when I was old and needed care, she'd be there. For me the way I'd always been there for her. That the love and sacrifice I'd poured into raising her would come back to me when I needed it most. Sitting in that parking lot, I realized how foolish I'd been. I tried calling Jessica 3 more times over the next 2 hours. Each call went straight to voicemail. By the time I drove home to my small house on Maple Street, the same house where I'd raised her, where she'd taken her first steps and spoken her first words, the sun was setting, and my phone remained silent. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner of soup and crackers, though I had no appetite. The kitchen felt too quiet, too empty. I kept glancing at my phone, willing it to ring. At 8 o'clock, I couldn't stand it anymore and called Jessica one more time. This time, she answered on the first ring. "Mom, I told you I was busy today. What's so urgent that you've been calling me nonstop?" "Jessica, I have cancer." The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. I could hear her breathing, could picture her standing in her pristine apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furnishings. Furnishings I'd helped her buy. "What kind of cancer?" Her voice had changed, become smaller. "Pancreatic, stage 3. I start chemotherapy next week." Another long pause. What's the prognosis?" "The doctor says it's serious but treatable. I'll need surgery eventually and the chemotherapy will be difficult." "Mom, I don't know what to say. This is so sudden." "I need you, Jessica. I've never asked you for much, but I need you now. The treatment center is downtown, not far from your office. Maybe you could drive me to some of the appointments or just be there sometimes. I don't want to go through this alone." "Mom, you know how crazy my schedule is right now. I'm trying to land the Harrison account. It could make my entire career, and with everything else I have going on." "Jessica, your mother has cancer." "I know that, Mom. And I'm sorry, I really am. But getting emotional and panicky isn't going to help anyone. You're strong. You've always been strong. You'll get through this like you get through everything else." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "But I don't want to be strong this time. I'm scared, honey. I'm 73 years old and I'm terrified." "Mom, don't talk like that. You're not going to die. You're going to beat this thing and then everything will go back to normal. Look, I'll try to visit when I can, okay? But right now, I really need to focus on work. This is a crucial time for me." "When?" I asked quietly. "When will you visit?" "I'll check my calendar and let you know. I have to run now. Mark is picking me up for dinner, and I'm all ready." Running late. Mark, her latest boyfriend, an investment banker who drove a Porsche and had never worked a day of physical labor in his life. She'd been seeing him for 3 months, and already he took priority over her dying mother. "I love you, Jessica." "Love you too, Mom. Try not to worry so much, okay? Everything's going to be fine." The line went dead, and I was alone again. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. This was the same room where I'd nursed Jessica through childhood illnesses, where I'd read her bedtime stories and helped her with homework. The same room where I'd cried when her father left, where I'd worried about how I'd managed to raise her alone, where I'd celebrated every one of her achievements as if they were my own. On my nightstand sat a framed photo of Jessica's college. Graduation. She stood in her cap and gown, radiant with youth and possibility, her arm around my shoulders. I was beaming with pride, my own face shining with the joy of seeing my daughter succeed. I'd been so proud that day, so certain that all my sacrifices had been worth it. Looking at that photo now, I wondered when exactly things had changed. When had my daughter become this person who was too busy for her dying mother? When had her career become more important than the woman who'd given up everything to ensure she could have one? I thought about the trust fund I'd established for her when she turned 30. $500,000. Every penny I'd managed to save and invest over the years, money that was supposed to be my security in old age. I'd given it to her because I wanted her to have financial freedom, to never have to struggle the way I had. She'd been so grateful then, so loving and appreciative. She'd cried and hugged me and promised she'd never forget what I'd done for her. But apparently gratitude has an expiration date. The next morning, I woke up to find 17 text messages from Jessica, but not one of them was about my cancer diagnosis. They were screenshots of shoes she was considering buying, designer, heels that cost $800 a pair. She wanted my opinion on which color would go better with her new dress, $800 for shoes, while her mother prepared to fight for her life alone. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my nightgown, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. Exactly. Though anger was certainly part of it. It was more like a awakening, a sudden clarity about the relationship I'd spent 20 years refusing to see clearly. I'd raised a selfish, entitled woman who viewed me as nothing, more than a convenient resource to be accessed when needed and ignored when inconvenient. I'd been so focused on giving her everything I'd never had that I'd forgotten to teach her the most important lessons of all: compassion, responsibility, and gratitude. But more than that, I'd enabled this behavior. Every time she'd taken me for granted, I'd excused it. Every time she'd put her wants before my needs, I'd rationalized it as ambition. Every time she'd treated me like an obligation rather than a person, I'd told myself it was just a phase, that she'd grow out of it. That deep down she still loved me. I'd been lying to myself for years. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jessica, this one asking if I thought she should get highlights in her hair before her big presentation next week. I set the phone aside without responding and went to make coffee. Outside my kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Peterson working in her garden, her movements slow but purposeful as she tended to her roses. She was probably close to my age, maybe older, and she was out there every morning, taking care of the things that mattered to her. I wondered if she had children. I wondered if they called her, visited her, remembered her birthday. I wondered if she'd ever felt as alone as I did right now. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the quiet kitchen with familiar sounds. I stood there in my robe and slippers, a 73-year-old woman with cancer, and tried to figure out how I'd ended up so completely alone despite having given everything to avoid exactly this situation. My appointment with Dr. Chen was scheduled for the following Tuesday. 5 days away. 5 days to prepare myself for the fight of my life, and I was going to face it entirely alone because my daughter was too busy shopping for shoes and planning dinner dates to care that her mother was dying. But as I stood there sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the neighborhood where I'd spent the last 30 years of my life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Determination. Not the kind of determination that comes from desperation, but the kind that comes from finally seeing the truth clearly. Jessica had made her choice. She'd chosen her career, her boyfriend, her social life, her expensive shoes over her mother's health and well-being. She'd had every opportunity to step up, to be the daughter I'd raised her to be, and she'd failed spectacularly. Now it was time for me to make some choices of my own. I pulled out my laptop and began researching Dr. Chen and the Riverside Cancer Treatment Center. If I was going to fight this battle alone, then I was going to be as prepared as possible. I read testimonials from other patients, studied treatment protocols, and learned everything I could about pancreatic cancer and its treatment options. And as I sat there gathering information and making notes, I felt something I hadn't felt In years, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with taking care of Jessica or making excuses for her behavior. For the first time in decades, I was going to focus entirely on taking care of myself. My phone buzzed again. Jessica, asking if I thought she should book a spa weekend before her big presentation. I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. The woman who would have dropped everything to help her daughter plan a spa weekend was gone. The woman who would have sent money for those $800 shoes was gone. The woman who had spent 20 years making excuses for Jessica's selfishness and ingratitude was gone. In her place sat a 73-year-old woman with cancer who was finally ready to fight, not just for her life, but for her dignity and self-respect. And Jessica was about to learn that actions have consequences, even when you're dealing with the mother who has always forgiven you for everything. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming my small kitchen and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was going to be a beautiful day, I realized. The first day of whatever came next. I had cancer, I had no support system, and I was facing the fight of my life completely alone. But for the first time in years, I also had something I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope for a future where I mattered, where my needs came first, where love was a two-way street instead of a one-way highway leading straight to disappointment. Jessica would learn, one way or another, what it meant to lose the thing you'd taken for granted, and I was going to be just fine watching her figure it out. The waiting room at Riverside Cancer Treatment Center smelled like antiseptic and artificial vanilla, a combination that made my stomach turn. I'd arrived 30 minutes early for my first appointment with Dr. Chen, partly because I'm never late for anything important, and partly because I had nowhere else to be. The receptionist, a kind woman named Linda with silver hair and gentle eyes, had checked me in with practiced efficiency and directed me to the oncology waiting area. I chose a chair near the window where I could watch the parking lot and the street beyond. Keeping busy helps when your mind wants to wander into dark territories, so I'd brought a crossword puzzle book and my reading glasses. But as I sat there trying to focus on 7 across, persistent in the face of adversity, I found myself watching the other patients instead. To my left sat a woman about my age, her head wrapped in a colorful silk scarf that couldn't quite hide the fact that she'd lost her hair. Her husband sat beside her, holding her hand and speaking to her in low, reassuring tones. Every few minutes, he'd squeeze her fingers or lean over to adjust her scarf with such tenderness that it made my chest ache. Across from me, a younger man, maybe 40, sat with what appeared to be his entire family surrounding him. His wife, 2 teenage children, and an older couple who were probably his parents. They were all talking quietly, sharing a bag of homemade cookies that his mother had obviously brought. When the nurse called his name, they all stood up with him, a united front of love and support. Near the magazine rack, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and weathered hands sat reading a newspaper while his adult daughter worked on her laptop, beside him. She looked up frequently to check on him, sometimes reaching over to pat his arm or ask if he needed anything. When he mentioned being thirsty, she immediately got up to find him water, returning with not just water, but also crackers, and a warm blanket she'd requested from the nurse's station. I watched these scenes of family devotion play out around me and felt the familiar sting of tears behind my eyes. This was what support looked like. This was what love in action actually meant. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but presence. Consistency. Showing up when someone you care about is facing their darkest hour. My phone sat silent in my purse. It had been 4 days since I'd told Jessica about my diagnosis, and she hadn't called once to check on me. She'd sent exactly 3 text messages in that time. One asking if I could recommend a good restaurant for her date with Mark, another requesting my grandmother's recipe for apple pie because she wanted to impress someone at work, and a third, asking if I knew where she'd stored her winter clothes from college. Not one word about my cancer, not one question about my treatment, Not one offer to help or even pretend to care. I'd responded to none of them. "Mrs. Scott?" A nurse with kind eyes and scrubs covered in cheerful butterflies appeared at my side. "Dr. Chen is ready to see you now." I gathered my purse and crossword book, taking one last look at the families around me. The woman in the silk scarf was leaning against her husband's shoulder now, his arm wrapped protectively around her. The young man's family was still clustered together, his wife now holding his hand while his mother rubbed his back. The elderly gentleman's daughter had closed her laptop and was giving him her full attention as they prepared to go in together. I followed the nurse down a hallway lined with inspirational posters and photographs of cancer survivors. Their smiling faces seemed to mock my solitude. "Look how happy we are," they seemed to say. "Look how loved and supported we were during our journey to recovery." Dr. Chen's office was larger than Dr. Martinez's, with a big window that looked out over a small garden where patients could sit during their treatment breaks. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of competent compassion that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Scott, please have a seat. I've reviewed your file from Dr. Martinez, and I want to discuss your treatment plan." She settled behind her desk with my folder open in front of her. "I understand this is your first oncology consultation, so I want to make sure you understand exactly what we're dealing with and what your options are." For the next 45 minutes, Dr. Chen walked me through everything: the tumor location, the staging, the treatment protocol she recommended. Chemotherapy would begin the following week, every Tuesday for 6 cycles, with each session lasting approximately 4 hours. After the 3rd cycle, we'd reassess and potentially add radiation therapy. Surgery would be considered once the tumor had shrunk sufficiently. "The side effects can be significant," she warned me gently. "Nausea, fatigue, hair loss, neuropathy in your hands and feet. Your immune system will be compromised, so you'll need to be careful about exposure to illness. Do you have family or friends who can help you during treatment?" The question I'd been dreading. "My daughter lives in the city," I said carefully. "She has a very demanding career." Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but I caught something in her eyes, a flicker of understanding that told me she'd heard this story before. "Support during treatment is crucial, Mrs. Scott. Is there anyone else you can call on? Siblings, close friends, neighbors?" "I'll manage," I said, the same words I'd been saying my entire life whenever things got difficult. "Mrs. Scott." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "I've been treating cancer patients for 12 years, and I've learned that the ones who try to handle everything alone don't fare as well as those who accept help. This isn't about being strong or independent. This is about giving yourself the best possible chance at recovery. What exactly would I need help with? Transportation to and from treatments, for starters. You shouldn't drive yourself home after chemotherapy. The anti-nausea medications can make you drowsy, and you'll likely feel quite unwell. Someone should stay with you for the first 24 hours after each treatment in case you have severe reactions. Grocery shopping, meal preparation, light housework, all of these become challenging when you're dealing with treatment side effects. The reality of what lay ahead was starting to sink in. I'd been so focused on the emotional betrayal of Jessica's abandonment that I hadn't fully considered the practical implications of facing cancer treatment alone. "There are support services available," Dr. Chen continued. "Patient navigators, volunteer driver programs, meal delivery services for cancer patients. Would you like me to have someone from our social services department contact you?" The thought of depending on strangers' charity made my cheeks burn with shame. I'd always been self-sufficient, always figured things out on my own. The idea of accepting help from people who didn't even know me felt like admitting defeat. "Let me think about it," I said. Dr. Chen nodded and made a note in my file. "One more thing, Mrs. Scott. I always ask my patients to bring someone to their first treatment session if possible. It can be overwhelming, and having a familiar face there helps with anxiety. Even if they can't stay for the entire session, just having someone there for the beginning can make a significant difference. I walked out of Dr. Chen's office with a folder full of information, appointment cards for the next 6 weeks, and a prescription for anti-nausea medication. The elevator down to the lobby seemed to take forever, and when the doors opened, I was faced with that waiting room again, still full of patients surrounded by loving families. I made it to my car before the tears came. I sat in the driver's seat of my 15-year-old Honda Civic and cried until my chest hurt. Not delicate, ladylike tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the scared, lonely woman I'd become. I cried for the daughter who couldn't be bothered to check on her dying mother. I cried for all the years I'd spent, giving and giving and giving, only to find myself completely alone when I needed someone most. When the tears finally stopped, I felt empty but oddly clear-headed. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, looking for someone, anyone, I could call for help. The list was pathetically short. Most of the numbers belonged to people I barely spoke to anymore, acquaintances from my working days who'd probably forgotten I existed. There was my sister Margaret in Arizona, but she had her own health problems and couldn't possibly travel. My old friend Ruth from the neighborhood had moved to Florida 2 years ago. Mrs. Patterson from church had passed away last spring. The harsh truth was that I'd spent so many years focused exclusively on Jessica that I'd let every other relationship in my life wither and die. I scrolled to Jessica's number and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to call her one more time, to tell her exactly what Dr. Chen had said about needing support, to make her understand that this wasn't about wanting attention, it was about survival. But a bigger part of me knew it wouldn't matter. She'd make the same excuses, offer the same empty promises to visit when she could, and leave me feeling even more abandoned than I already did. Instead, I drove home and spent the evening researching the support services Dr. Chen had mentioned. The volunteer driver program had a 3-week waiting list. The meal delivery service required a financial hardship waiver that I wasn't sure I qualified for. The patient navigator program seemed promising, but the woman I spoke with explained that their services were primarily for helping patients understand their treatment options and navigate insurance issues, not for providing personal support during treatment sessions. I was on my own, just as I'd suspected. That night, I called Jessica one more time. I told myself it would be the last time, that I would give her one final opportunity to be the daughter I'd raised her to be, to show even a flicker of the compassion and love I'd spent 38 years trying to instill in her. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted and slightly out of breath. "Mom, what's up? I'm at yoga class. Can this be quick?" "I had my first appointment with the oncologist today." "Oh, how did it go?" She explained the treatment plan. "I'll need chemotherapy every week for 6 weeks, then possibly radiation. Each session takes about 4 hours. That sounds rough, but you'll get through it. You always do." "Jessica, I need someone to drive me to treatments. The medications make it unsafe for me to drive home afterward." A pause. "What about taking an Uber?" "An Uber," I repeated the words flatly. "You want your mother to take Uber to cancer treatments." "Mom, you know how crazy my schedule is right now. The Harrison account is at a critical stage, and I can't just disappear for hours at a time. Maybe we could hire someone? Like a private driver or a nurse or something?" "I don't need a nurse, Jessica. I need my daughter." "That's not fair. Mom, you know I'd help if I could, but I've worked too hard to get where I am to throw it all away now. This is my chance to really make something of myself. And what about me? What about the woman who worked 2 jobs so you could have dance lessons? What about the mother who took out a second mortgage to pay for your education? What about the person who gave you $500,000 so you could have financial security?" "Mom, don't be dramatic. This isn't about money or keeping score. This is about being practical. I can't be everything to everyone. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear music and voices in the background. She was at some trendy yoga studio, probably the kind where classes cost $50 each, surrounded by other successful young professionals who had their entire lives ahead of them. I have to go, Mom. My class is starting, and I already paid for it. Look, I'll try to figure something out, okay? Maybe I can rearrange my schedule once in a while. When? I asked. When will you try to figure something out? I don't know exactly when. Soon, I promise. Your promises don't mean much anymore, Jessica. Mom, that's hurtful. Just because I can't drop everything at a moment's notice doesn't mean I don't care about you. Then show me that you care. Be there for me the way I've always been. There for you. I have to go. We'll talk later, okay? The line went dead before I could respond. I sat in my kitchen holding the silent phone and felt something fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't anger, though anger was certainly part of it. It wasn't even disappointment, because disappointment implied that I'd still had expectations to be crushed. It was something colder and more final than that. It was acceptance. I accepted that my daughter was not the person I'd hoped she would become. I accepted that the love I'd given her had not taught her how to love others. I accepted that I had failed as a mother, not because I hadn't loved her enough, but because I'd loved her too much and asked for too little in return. And I accepted that I was going to face cancer alone because the one person in the world who should have cared enough to help me had chosen yoga class instead. I walked to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, where I kept important documents in a fireproof box. Birth certificates, insurance policies, the deed to the house, and there at the bottom, the trust fund papers I'd signed 5 years ago. $500,000, transferred to Jessica Scott on her 33rd birthday, with the understanding that the money would provide her with security and freedom. I'd never asked her what she'd done with it. I'd assumed she'd invested, wisely, maybe used some of it for her business or saved it for emergencies. But looking at those papers now, I found myself wondering. Jessica lived expensively. The penthouse apartment, the luxury car, the designer clothes, the frequent vacations to exotic locations that she documented obsessively on social media. Where was all that money coming from? I pulled out my laptop, and for the first time in years, looked at Jessica's social media accounts. What I found there made my blood run cold. Photos from last month, Jessica and Mark at an exclusive resort in the Bahamas, cocktails by the pool, dinners at restaurants where a single meal probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. The week before that, a shopping spree in Chicago, bags from Nordstrom and Saks, shoes that cost more than my monthly electric bill. 3 weeks ago, a spa weekend with her girlfriends, massages and facials and treatments that added up to thousands of dollars. I scrolled back through months of photos, each one documenting a lifestyle of casual extravagance that could only be sustained by someone with significant wealth. Designer handbags that cost $5,000 each, jewelry that sparkled in the carefully staged photos, weekend getaways to expensive destinations. All of it funded by the money I'd given her. The money I'd intended to be her security had become her playground. While I sat alone in a cancer treatment center, my daughter was spending my life savings on champagne and caviar. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen window. Outside, Mrs. Peterson was sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset. She looked peaceful, content in her solitude. I wondered if she'd ever had children, if she'd ever sacrificed everything for someone who couldn't be bothered to care in return. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jessica again. Mom, forgot to mention, Mark and I are going to Napa Valley this weekend for wine tasting. So excited. P.S. Do you still have Dad's old camera? Mark wants to borrow it for some photography project. She wanted to borrow my ex-husband's camera while I prepared for chemotherapy alone. She was asking me for another favor while ignoring my plea for help. Even now, Even after everything, she saw me as nothing more than a resource to be tapped, when convenient. I deleted the message without responding and made myself a simple dinner of soup and toast. As I ate, I thought about Dr. Chen's words about support being crucial for recovery. She was right, of course. I did need help. I did need someone to drive me to treatments, to check on me afterward, to make sure I was eating and staying hydrated, and managing my medications properly. But I wasn't going to get that help from Jessica. That much was crystal clear. So I would find another way. I would hire drivers if necessary. I would arrange for grocery delivery and meal services. I would pay for whatever help I needed, even if it meant dipping into the small savings account I'd been building back up since giving Jessica her trust fund. What I wouldn't do was continue to beg for scraps of attention from a daughter who had made it abundantly clear that her mother's life was worth less to her than a yoga class. That night, I made a list of everything I would need during treatment. Transportation, meal preparation, someone to check on me after each chemo session, help with housework during the weeks when I'd be too weak to manage it myself. Then I researched services and made phone calls, methodically arranging for every need to be met by paid professionals rather than family members. It was expensive, more expensive than I'd anticipated. But as I calculated the costs, I realized something that made me smile for the first time in days. I could afford it, easily, because buried in the trust fund paperwork was something I'd forgotten about, a clause I'd insisted on when my attorney had drawn up the documents. If Jessica ever demonstrated what the legal language called gross irresponsibility or callous disregard for the grantor's welfare, the trust could be revoked and the remaining funds returned to me. I'd put that clause in as insurance, never imagining I'd actually need to use it. I'd been protecting myself from a scenario I couldn't have imagined at the time, that my own daughter would abandon me in my hour of greatest need. But Jessica had made her choice. She'd chosen wine tasting over chemotherapy appointments. She'd chosen yoga classes over caring for her dying mother. She'd chosen to spend my money on luxuries while leaving me to face cancer alone. Now I was going to make a choice of my own. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for James Morrison, the attorney who'd handled the trust fund paperwork 5 years ago. He was probably retired by now, but his office would have records of the trust and could advise me on the revocation process. Tomorrow, I would call him. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of taking back what was mine from a daughter who had proven herself unworthy of both my money and my love. Tonight, I would go to bed knowing that I was finally going to stop enabling Jessica's selfishness and start taking care of the one person who actually deserved my concern. Myself. As I turned off the lights and headed to my bedroom, my reflection caught my eye in the hallway mirror. I looked older than my 73 years, worn down by months of worry and years of disappointment. But there was something else there too, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. Resolve. The strength that comes from finally accepting an unacceptable situation and deciding to change it. Jessica thought she could take everything from me and give nothing back. She thought she could treat me like an ATM and a convenience store, withdrawing what she needed and ignoring me the rest of the time. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The woman who had always put her daughter first was gone. In her place was someone who had finally learned that love without respect is worthless, that giving without limits creates takers, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach someone the consequences of their actions. Tomorrow, my real education would begin, not about cancer or chemotherapy or survival rates, but about standing up for myself after a lifetime of being taken for granted. And Jessica was going to get an education too, whether she wanted one or not. The first chemotherapy session arrived like a storm I'd been watching approach for weeks. I woke up that Tuesday morning with my stomach in knots, not from the cancer, but from the crushing weight of facing it entirely alone. I'd arranged for a medical transport service to drive me, $30 each way, money I could have saved if I'd had a daughter who cared enough to help. But Jessica was probably sleeping, peacefully in her expensive sheets, dreaming about her next vacation or shopping spree. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing comfortable clothes as the nurses had instructed, and packed a small bag with books, crackers, and the tablet I'd bought specifically for long treatment sessions. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was more prepared for this battle than the person who should have been fighting alongside me. The medical transport driver was a kind, older gentleman named Frank, who told me he'd been driving cancer patients for 3 years. "It's rewarding work," he said as we pulled into the treatment center parking lot. "Most folks are real brave, and their families are so grateful for the help." I didn't tell him I was the exception, the patient whose family couldn't be bothered to show up. The chemotherapy suite was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of a sterile, frightening medical environment, it felt almost comfortable. Reclining chairs were arranged in a large, bright room with windows overlooking a garden. Each station had its own small table and reading light. Soft music played in the background, and the nurses moved between patients with quiet efficiency and genuine warmth. "You must be Carolyn," said a nurse with curly red hair and kind eyes. Her name tag read, Patty. "I'll be taking care of you today. Is this your first time?" I nodded, suddenly feeling like a lost child on the first day of school. "Well, you're in good hands. Dr. Chen has you on an excellent protocol, and we're going to make sure you're as comfortable as possible. Are you here alone today, or is someone joining you?" The question I'd been dreading since I walked in. "Just me," I said, trying to sound matter-of-fact rather than pathetic. Patty's expression softened slightly. "That's perfectly fine. Some of our strongest patients prefer to handle their treatments independently. Let me show you to your chair and get you settled." She led me to a recliner near the window and helped me get comfortable, adjusting pillows and showing me how to work the chair controls. As she prepared my IV line, I watched other patients around the room. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Almost everyone had someone with them. Spouses holding hands, adult children scrolling through phones while staying close by, friends reading magazines and chatting quietly to keep their loved ones distracted. In the chair next to mine sat a woman about my age named Dorothy. Her daughter Sarah, not much younger than my Jessica, sat beside her with a bag full of activities: crossword puzzles, magazines, homemade soup in a thermos, and what looked like a photo album. "Mom, I brought pictures from Tommy's soccer game last weekend," Sarah was saying. "Wait until you see the goal he scored in the second half." Dorothy's face lit up as she looked through the photos. "Oh my goodness, look at that form. He's getting so good. Did you send copies to his grandfather?" "Already done." Dad printed out his favorites and put them on the refrigerator. Tommy was so proud when he saw them there this morning. I found myself listening to their conversation with a mixture of longing and bitterness. This was what family looked like. This was what it meant to be loved and supported through a crisis. Dorothy's daughter had taken time off work to be there, had brought comfort items and family photos, was fully present and engaged in her mother's care. Meanwhile, my daughter was probably in some business meeting, completely oblivious to the fact that her mother was receiving poison designed to save her life. Patty returned with my medication bag and began connecting tubes to my IV port. "This will take about 4 hours," she explained. "The first drug is to prevent nausea. Then we'll start the chemotherapy agents. Some patients feel tired during treatment, others feel fine. There's no right or wrong way to react." As the medications began flowing into my system, I tried to focus on my book, but the words seemed to blur together. Instead, I found myself eavesdropping on conversations around the room, absorbing these glimpses into families that functioned the way families were supposed to. "How are you feeling, Mom? Do you need another blanket?" This from a middle-aged son who'd driven 3 hours from another city to be with his father. "I brought that herbal tea you like. The nurses said I could heat it up in their microwave. A daughter carefully measuring tea into a travel mug for her mother. The grandkids made you cards. Want to see them now or save them for later? Another son pulling a stack of handmade cards from a backpack. Each exchange was like a knife in my chest. These families made it look so easy, so natural. Being there for each other wasn't a burden or an inconvenience. It was just what you did when someone you loved needed you. I pulled out my phone and stared at Jessica's contact information. Part of me wanted to call her right then, to tell her where I was, what I was going through, how alone I felt. But a larger part of me knew it would be pointless. She'd make excuses, promise to visit soon, and then go back to her self-absorbed life without giving me another thought. Instead, I opened my email and composed a message to James Morrison, the attorney who'd handled Jessica's trust fund. I'd called his office the day before and learned he was still practicing, though planning to retire within the year. His assistant had scheduled a phone consultation for later in the week, but sitting in that chemotherapy chair, surrounded by evidence of what real family love looked like, I felt an urgent need to begin the process of taking back what was mine. Mr. Morrison, I typed slowly on my tablet, pausing when waves of nausea hit. I need to discuss the revocation clause in the trust fund document you prepared for my daughter Jessica Scott 5 years ago. Circumstances have arisen that I believe trigger the conditions we discussed at the time. I would like to begin the legal process as soon as possible. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. About 2 hours into my treatment, Dorothy's daughter Sarah left to get lunch, promising to bring back her mother's favorite sandwich from a deli across town. Dorothy noticed me watching and smiled. "She's a good girl," Dorothy said. "Sometimes, I think she worries about me more than I worry about myself." "You're lucky to have her," I said. "I am, though I wasn't always sure it would turn out this way. She was pretty wild in her 20s, parties, questionable boyfriends, couldn't hold down a job. I wondered if I'd failed as a mother. I felt a spark of interest. What changed? Life, I suppose. She got married, had children, grew up. But more than that, I think she finally understood what family means. Her husband lost his father to cancer about 10 years ago, and seeing how much he regretted not being there enough really affected her. When I got diagnosed, she was determined not to make the same mistake. "Some people never learn that lesson," I said quietly. Dorothy studied my face with the keen perception that comes from years of living. "You're here alone." It wasn't a question. "My daughter has a very demanding career," I said, the excuse falling flat even to my own ears. Dorothy's expression suggested she knew exactly what that meant. "How old is she?" 38. "Old enough to know better, then." The simple statement carried more understanding than any lengthy sympathy speech could have. Dorothy knew. She'd seen it before, adult children too busy with their own lives to care for aging parents, too focused on their careers and social lives to remember the people who'd sacrificed everything for them. "The thing about cancer," Dorothy continued, "is that it shows you who people really are. The crisis strips away all the pretenses and excuses. Some people step up, and others disappear. It's painful when it's your own child, but it's also clarifying." Clarifying. Yes, that was exactly the right word. Cancer had clarified everything about my relationship with Jessica, stripping away my decades of denial and wishful thinking to reveal the stark truth underneath. She simply didn't care enough about me to inconvenience herself in any way. Sarah returned with lunch for her mother and immediately noticed that Dorothy looked tired. "Mom, you're getting pale. Do you want me to ask the nurse about adjusting your chair?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little sleepy." "Here, let me adjust your pillows." Sarah fussed over her mother with gentle efficiency, rearranging blankets and making sure she was comfortable before unpacking the sandwich she'd driven across town to get. "They had that soup you like too. I got you a container for later." I watched this exchange and felt something crystallize inside me. This was what I'd given up my entire life to create. A daughter who would love me enough to drive across town for soup when I was sick. Instead, I'd raised someone who couldn't even be bothered to return my phone calls when I told her I had cancer. The irony was devastating. I'd sacrificed everything to give Jessica opportunities I'd never had, and in doing so, I'd raised someone who felt entitled to take everything and give nothing back. My love had been so unconditional that she'd never learned to value it. My giving had been so unlimited that she'd never learned gratitude. I'd failed as a mother, but not in the way I'd always feared. I hadn't failed because I didn't love her enough. I'd failed because I'd loved her too much and demanded too little in return. My phone buzzed with a text message. For one hopeful moment, I thought it might be Jessica checking on me. Instead, it was a message from an unknown number with a photo attached. I opened it to find a picture of Jessica and Mark at what looked like an expensive wine bar, both of them laughing and holding glasses of champagne. The message read, "Your daughter seems to be having a wonderful time at Chez Laurent. Thought you might like to see." Anonymous friend. Someone had seen Jessica out having an expensive lunch while her mother underwent chemotherapy and felt compelled to let me know. The humiliation was complete. Not only was my daughter absent, but people were noticing her absence, pitying me for being abandoned by my own child. I stared at the photo for a long time. Jessica looked radiant, carefree, completely unburdened by any thought of her mother's suffering. She was wearing a new dress I didn't recognize, probably another expensive purchase funded by my money, and the jewelry glittering at her throat looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. While I sat in a medical chair with poison flowing through my veins, fighting for my life, Jessica was drinking champagne and posing for photos at a restaurant where appetizers probably cost $50 each. I deleted the message and the photo, but the image burned in my memory. This was who my daughter really was. Not the grateful, loving child I'd imagined all these years, but a selfish, entitled woman who viewed her mother's cancer diagnosis as nothing more than an inconvenience to be ignored. "Bad news?" Dorothy asked gently. She'd noticed my expression. "Just clarity," I said, borrowing her word. She nodded knowingly. Sometimes that's harder than bad news. The rest of my treatment passed in a haze of nausea and quiet observation. I watched Dorothy's daughter help her mother to the bathroom when she felt dizzy. I saw the middle-aged son reading aloud to his father from a biography they'd been enjoying together. I witnessed a grandmother showing her visiting granddaughter how to knit while IV medications dripped slowly into her arm. All around me, families demonstrated what love looked like in crisis. Presence, patience, small acts of service that said, "You matter to me," more clearly than any words could. And I sat alone, abandoned by the one person who should have been there above all others. When my treatment finished, Patty disconnected my IV and gave me detailed instructions about managing side effects. "You'll probably feel tired for the next day or two. Make sure you stay hydrated and eat small, frequent meals. Don't hesitate to call if you have any concerning symptoms." "I will," I promised, though we both knew I had no one to call if I needed help. Frank, my driver, was waiting in the lobby as scheduled. As we walked to his car, I felt the full weight of what lay ahead. 5 more treatments, 5 more Tuesdays sitting alone while other patients enjoyed the support of loving families. 5 more opportunities for Jessica to prove that her mother's life meant less to her than her social calendar. But I also felt something else, a growing sense of resolution that had been building throughout the day. Watching those families had shown me what I'd been missing, but it had also shown me what I deserved. I deserved better than a daughter who couldn't be bothered to check on my first chemotherapy treatment. I deserved better than someone who spent my money on champagne while I fought cancer alone. And I was finally ready to do something about it. When I got home, exhausted and nauseated, but strangely energized by newfound purpose, I found 3 missed calls from James Morrison's office. His assistant had left a voicemail saying he'd reviewed my email and wanted to discuss the trust fund situation as soon as possible. Apparently, the revocation clause I'd insisted on years ago was more straightforward than I'd remembered. I also found 2 text messages from Jessica. The first was a selfie from her lunch at Chez Laurent with the caption, "Amazing wine selection. Here! You should try this place sometime." The second asked if I could overnight her grandmother's pearl necklace because she wanted to wear it to a gala this weekend. She wanted to borrow my mother's pearls for a party while I recovered from chemotherapy alone. The audacity was breathtaking. I looked at those messages for a long time, then walked to my bedroom and opened the jewelry box where I kept my mother's necklace. The pearls had been my mother's pride and joy, passed down from her mother before her. I'd planned to give them to Jessica someday, imagining her wearing them at her wedding or other special occasions, continuing the family tradition. But traditions were for families, and Jessica had made it clear that we weren't really a family. We were just 2 people who happened to share DNA, one of whom gave constantly while the other took without thought or gratitude. I put the pearls back in the jewelry box and closed it firmly. Then I called James Morrison's office and scheduled an emergency appointment for the next morning. If Jessica wanted to play games, to treat her dying mother like an inconvenience while spending her money on luxuries, then it was time to change the rules. That evening, as I lay in bed fighting waves of nausea from the chemotherapy, I thought about Dorothy and her daughter Sarah. I thought about the love I'd witnessed throughout that treatment room, the kind of love I'd always believed I was building with Jessica through years of sacrifice and unconditional giving. I'd been wrong about so many things. I'd confused enabling with loving, indulgence with kindness. I'd thought that giving Jessica everything she wanted would teach her to value what she had. Instead, it had taught her that she was entitled to everything and responsible for nothing. But it wasn't too late to teach her a different lesson. It wasn't too late to show her that actions have consequences, that love requires reciprocity, that you can't take advantage of someone indefinitely without eventually losing them entirely. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of taking back what was mine. The money I'd given her in love, she'd squandered in selfishness. The trust I'd placed in her character, she'd violated through her callous abandonment. The future I'd tried to secure for her, she'd forfeited through her own choices. Jessica thought she could have it all, my money, my support, my unconditional love, while giving nothing in return. She thought she could treat me like a bank account that never closed, a safety net that would always be there no matter how she behaved. She was about to learn how wrong she was. As I drifted off to sleep, still queasy from treatment but oddly peaceful for the first time in weeks, I smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd have with James Morrison in the morning. Jessica had made her choice to abandon her mother in Sapa in favor of wine tastings and shopping sprees. Now I was going to make a choice of my own. The next morning, I woke up feeling worse than I'd expected. The nausea was persistent, and even the smell of coffee made my stomach turn. But I forced myself to shower and dress carefully for my appointment with James Morrison. This was too important to postpone because of side effects. Morrison's law office was downtown, in one of those old buildings with high ceilings and polished wood that spoke of tradition and reliability. I'd chosen him years ago because he specialized in estate planning and had a reputation for protecting his clients' interests above all else. Now I was grateful for that foresight. "Mrs. Scott," he said, rising from behind his mahogany desk as his secretary showed me in. "I'm sorry to hear about your health situation, and I'm not surprised to hear about the circumstances that brought you here today." He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When I'd first set up Jessica's trust fund, he'd been the one to suggest including the revocation clause, despite my protests that I'd never need it. "You were right to insist on that clause," I told him as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. I just never imagined I'd actually need to use it. "In my experience, Mrs. Scott, The people who think they'll never need protection are often the ones who need it most. Now, tell me exactly what's been happening. For the next hour, I laid out the whole story. Jessica's complete absence since my diagnosis, her refusal to help with treatments, her continued requests for money and favors while ignoring my medical crisis. I showed him the photos from her expensive lunch yesterday, the text messages asking for my mother's pearls, the evidence of her lavish lifestyle funded by money I'd intended for her security. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with those sharp eyes. Mrs. Scott, the revocation clause in Jessica's trust is quite clear. It allows you to reclaim the funds if she demonstrates gross irresponsibility or callous disregard for the grantor's welfare. Based on what you've told me, her behavior easily meets that standard. How much is left? I asked. He pulled out a file and flipped through several pages. The trust currently holds approximately $430,000. She's spent about $70,000 over the past 5 years, more than we'd typically recommend, but not unreasonable for someone with her income level. However, he paused, looking at more recent statements. The spending has accelerated significantly in the past 18 months. Large withdrawals for what appear to be luxury purchases and travel. $430,000. Still, a substantial sum, enough to pay for my cancer treatment and then some. Money that could ensure I had proper care during my illness, instead of relying on paid strangers and medical transport services. What's the process for revocation? I asked. Straightforward, given the clause we included. I'll need to document the circumstances that justify revocation. Her abandonment during your cancer treatment certainly qualifies. We'll need medical records confirming your diagnosis and treatment schedule, and evidence of her failure to provide reasonable assistance despite your requests. The photographs and text messages you've shown me will be helpful. How long will it take? 2 weeks, perhaps 3. I'll prepare the revocation documents and serve them on Jessica through certified mail. She'll have 30 days to contest the revocation, but based on the circumstances, any challenge would be unsuccessful. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. And then? Then the funds return to your control. You can do whatever you want with the money. Keep it, donate it, establish a new trust with different conditions. It's entirely your decision. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like I had some control over my situation. Jessica had chosen to abandon me when I needed her most. Now I was choosing to stop enabling her selfishness with my money. There's one more thing, Morrison said carefully. Have you considered what this will do to your relationship with Jessica? The question made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. What relationship? She hasn't called me once since I told her about my cancer. She's too busy spending my money on champagne lunches to care whether her mother lives or dies. So, taking back the trust fund will likely end any possibility of reconciliation. I thought about that for a moment. Mr. Morrison, you can't destroy something that doesn't exist. Jessica and I don't have a relationship. We have an arrangement where I give and she takes. I'm simply ending that arrangement. He nodded slowly. Then we'll proceed. I'll have the documents ready for your signature by the end of the week. As I left Morrison's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The decision was made, the wheels were in motion. Jessica would soon learn that her mother wasn't an inexhaustible resource to be exploited without consequence. But first, I had 4 more chemotherapy treatments to get through, and I was going to do it with dignity and self-respect intact. I'd hire the best care money could buy, my own money, reclaimed from a daughter who'd proven herself unworthy of both my generosity and my love. That afternoon, I received a call from Dorothy, the woman I'd met during chemotherapy. She'd gotten my number from the treatment center's patient directory and wanted to check on how I was feeling after my first session. "I hope you don't mind me calling," she said. "Sarah suggested I reach out. She was worried about you going through treatment alone." I was touched that Dorothy's daughter had thought of me, that she'd shown more concern for a stranger than my own child had shown for me. "I'm managing," I said. "A bit queasy, but nothing I can't handle." "Listen, Carolyn, I know we just met, but Sarah and I were talking, and we'd like to offer to drive you to your next treatment. It's no trouble. We'll be there anyway for my session." The kindness of strangers was overwhelming when compared to the indifference of my own daughter. "That's very generous of you, but I've arranged for medical transport." "Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands. And Carolyn, whatever's going on with your daughter, sometimes people come around when they realize what they're about to lose." After we hung up, I thought about Dorothy's words. Maybe Jessica would come around eventually, when she realized that her actions had consequences she'd never anticipated. Or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd be so angry about losing her trust fund that she'd cut me out of her life entirely. Either way, I was finally ready to find out who my daughter really was beneath all the excuses and entitlement. And if the answer disappointed me, at least I'd no longer be funding her selfishness with my own money. The truth, as Dorothy had said, was clarifying. And sometimes clarity was worth more than false hope. 3 days after my meeting with James Morrison, the legal papers were ready. I sat in his office on a gray Thursday morning, my hands steadier than they'd been in weeks, as I signed my name to the trust fund revocation documents. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd given away too freely, too trustingly. "The certified mail will be delivered to Jessica's address tomorrow," Morrison explained, sliding the papers into a manila folder. "She'll have 30 days to respond if she chooses to contest the revocation, though as I mentioned, her chances of success are essentially non-existent given the circumstances." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. What happens if she doesn't respond? Then the revocation becomes final automatically. The funds will be transferred back to an account in your name within 48 hours of the deadline. 48 hours. After 37 years of putting Jessica first, prioritizing her needs above my own, and sacrificing my financial security for her benefit, I would finally have some control back over my own life. "There's something else," Morrison said, his tone becoming more serious. "I've been practicing family law for over 30 years, Mrs. Scott, and I've seen situations like this before, when adult children are confronted with the consequences of their behavior, especially financial consequences. Their reactions can be intense. You think she'll be angry? I think she'll be furious. She's grown accustomed to having access to that money, to living a lifestyle it supports. Having it suddenly removed will be a shock. You should be prepared for her to contact you, possibly multiple times, and possibly not in a friendly manner." I considered this. In 38 years, I'd rarely seen Jessica truly angry. Frustrated, yes. Impatient, certainly. But real anger was something she'd always been careful to hide from me, perhaps knowing instinctively that I'd cave to whatever she wanted if she just maintained the right tone. "I'm prepared for that," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I was. "Good. And Mrs. Scott? You're doing the right thing. I've watched too many parents bankrupt themselves trying to buy their children's love. It never works." As I left Morrison's office, I felt like I was walking away from one version of myself and toward another. The woman who had signed those papers was not the same woman who had cried alone in her car after that first oncology appointment. This woman had boundaries. This woman had self-respect. This woman was finally ready to stop being a victim of her own generosity. I spent the rest of that day putting my affairs in order. I called my bank to discuss transferring the trust fund money into a separate account earmarked for medical expenses. I researched private nursing services for the weeks when chemotherapy side effects would be most severe. I even looked into hiring a housekeeper to help with cleaning and meal preparation. For the first time in decades, I was spending money on myself without guilt, without wondering if Jessica might need something more important. It felt foreign and liberating at the same time. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at Romano's, a small Italian restaurant downtown that I'd always wanted to try, but had never felt I could justify the expense. I sat alone at a table for two, enjoying osso buco and a glass of wine, watching other diners and feeling oddly peaceful. Halfway through my meal, my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my heart leaped with the old familiar hope that maybe she was finally calling to check on my health, to ask about my treatment, to show some sign that she cared. I answered on the third ring. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something weird that happened today." Her voice was tight with irritation. "Some legal firm called my office asking for my address for certified mail delivery. Do you know anything about that?" My stomach dropped. Morrison had said the papers wouldn't be delivered until tomorrow, but apparently his office had called to confirm her address. Jessica's assistant must have mentioned it to her. "I don't know what you're referring to," I said carefully. It wasn't technically a lie. I didn't know the specific details of how the delivery was being arranged. "Well, it's probably some mistake, but it's really annoying. I had to give them my home address, and you know how I feel about giving out personal information to strangers. This better not be some scam you got mixed up in." Even now, even when discussing something that was clearly related to legal matters, Jessica's first concern was for her own inconvenience, not curiosity about why her mother might be involved in legal proceedings, not concern about what might be wrong, just irritation that her day had been briefly disrupted. "I'm sure it's nothing important," I said. "It better not be. I've got the Morrison account presentation on Monday, and I can't deal with any distractions this weekend. Speaking of which, did you overnight those pearls yet? I really need them for Saturday night." The pearls. She was still asking for my mother's pearls while legal papers ending her trust fund were being prepared for delivery. "No, I haven't sent them." "Mom, I asked you about this 3 days ago. The gala is Saturday night, and I specifically bought my dress to match those pearls. Can you please just send them tomorrow? It's really not that complicated." The casual expectation in her voice, the assumption that I would comply with her demands while she ignored my needs, crystallized everything I'd been feeling into cold, hard resolve. "No, Jessica, I'm not sending the pearls." Silence on the other end. Then, "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. I'm not sending them to you." "But I need them for the gala. I already told everyone I'd be wearing grandmother's pearls. My dress won't look right without them." "Then you'll have to find something else to wear." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mom, what's gotten into you lately? You've been acting really strange ever since you told me about your cancer thing. I know you're probably scared, but taking it out on me isn't fair." My cancer thing. She'd just referred to my potentially terminal illness as my cancer thing, as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than a fight for my life. "This has nothing to do with being scared, Jessica. This has to do with respect. Or rather, your complete lack of it. That's not fair. Just because I can't drop everything to hold your hand through medical appointments doesn't mean I don't respect you. I have responsibilities, obligations. My career is at a crucial point right now. Your career has been at a crucial point for 20 years. There's always some account, some presentation, some networking event that's more important than your mother. That's not true, and you know it. I call you all the time." "When did you last call me, Jessica?" We're talking right now." "Before today." "When was the last time you called me?" Silence. "I'll tell you when. 2 weeks ago, when you wanted my grandmother's recipe for apple pie. Before that, it was 3 weeks ago when you needed a restaurant recommendation. You never call just to see how I am, to ask about my life, to check if I need anything. You only call when you want something. Mom, you're being dramatic. This isn't like you. No, this is exactly like me. This is who I've always been. I just hid it under 30 years of excuses and enabling. But cancer has a way of clarifying things, Jessica. It shows you who people really are when the stakes are high. I don't understand what you want from me. I'm doing the best I can. Are you? Because your best involves going to wine tastings while your mother undergoes chemotherapy alone. Your best means asking for jewelry while ignoring my medical crisis. Your best is treating me like a bank account instead of a human being. I'm not treating you like a bank account. Aren't you? When was the last time you spent time with me that didn't involve asking for money or favors? When was the last time you showed any interest in my life, my feelings, my needs? The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Look, Mom, I'm sorry if you feel neglected, but you have to understand my situation. The Harrison account alone could set me up for life. If I can land this deal, I'll be able to take better care of you in the future. I don't want you to take care of me in the future, Jessica. I wanted you to care about me now, when I needed you most. And you couldn't be bothered. I do care about you. Just because I can't physically be there every second doesn't mean I don't care. You haven't been there for 1 second, not one chemotherapy appointment, not one doctor's visit, not one phone call to check how I'm feeling. You've been completely absent from the biggest crisis of my life. Mom, you're being unfair. I have a life, responsibilities. So do I, Jessica. I have responsibilities too. I have a responsibility to stop enabling your selfishness. I have a responsibility to stop funding a lifestyle for someone who treats me like an inconvenience. And what's that supposed to mean? You'll find out tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, but it wasn't from fear or sadness. It was from adrenaline, from the rush of finally saying things I should have said years ago. I'd spent decades swallowing my hurt, making excuses for Jessica's behavior, telling myself that her success was more important than my needs, but cancer had indeed clarified things. It had shown me that all my sacrifice, all my unconditional love, all my financial support had created not a grateful, caring daughter, but an entitled, selfish woman who viewed her dying mother as nothing, more than a source of inconvenience and occasional resources. The waiter approached my table cautiously. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" I realized I'd been sitting there staring at my phone, probably looking upset. "Everything's fine," I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. "Could I see the dessert menu, please?" I ordered tiramisu and another glass of wine, and sat there in that small restaurant feeling more peaceful than I had since my diagnosis. Tomorrow, Jessica would receive the legal papers revoking her trust fund. She would probably call me screaming, demanding explanations, making threats and promises in equal measure. But tonight, I was simply a woman enjoying dinner alone, free from the burden of constantly worrying about a daughter who had never learned to worry about anyone but herself. The next morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly energetic despite being 4 days out from my last chemotherapy treatment. I made myself a proper breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and ate it slowly while reading the newspaper. No rushing to answer Jessica's calls. No anxiety about what new demand or crisis she might present me with. Just quiet morning peace. Around noon, my phone started ringing. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 5 minutes later, then again. By 2 o'clock, she'd called 8 times and left 6 increasingly frantic voicemails. I listened to them in order, watching the progression from confusion to disbelief to rage. "Mom, I got some legal papers in the mail about my trust fund being revoked. This has to be some kind of mistake. Call me back immediately." "Mom, I'm serious. These papers say you're taking back my trust fund because of callous disregard for your welfare or something. This is insane. Call me back right now. I can't believe you would do this to me. Do you have any idea what this means? I have payments, commitments, plans that depend on that money. You can't just take it back because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown. This is financial abuse, Mom. I'm going to contest this, and I'm going to win. You can't destroy my life because you're mad about some imagined slight. I have rights. Fine, don't answer your phone. But this isn't over. I'm coming over tonight, and we're going to sort this out like adults. You can't just throw away our entire relationship over nothing. I talked to a lawyer, and he says you can't do this without proving I've done something wrong. Well, I haven't done anything wrong. I've been a good daughter and you know it. This is just you being vindictive because I can't babysit you through your medical appointments. The final voicemail was the most telling. You know what, Mom? Maybe you're right. Maybe I haven't been the perfect daughter. But neither have you been the perfect mother. You were always so focused on work, on paying bills, on being practical. You never had time for fun, for spontaneity, for living life. I learned to be independent because I had to. And now you're punishing me for the independence you created. This is your fault as much as mine. I sat in my kitchen listening to these messages and felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. Even faced with concrete consequences for her behavior, Jessica couldn't take responsibility. She was already rewriting history, casting herself as the victim and me as the villain. The woman who had worked 2 jobs to pay for her dance lessons was now accused of being too focused on work. The mother who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities was now blamed for making her too independent. It was classic Jessica. When confronted with uncomfortable truths, she turned them around and made them someone else's fault. My doorbell rang at 6:30 that evening. I'd been expecting it, had actually been surprised it took her this long to show up. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica standing on my front porch, still in her work clothes, her face tight with anger. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About what?" "About the fact that you're trying to destroy my life over some petty grievance. About the fact that you're taking away money you gave me as a gift because you're having some kind of breakdown." It wasn't a gift, Jessica. It was a trust fund with conditions. You violated those conditions. What conditions? I haven't done anything wrong. Haven't you? When I told you I had cancer, you hung up on me to go to a networking event. When I asked for help getting to medical appointments, you suggested I take Uber. When I was getting chemotherapy, you were posting pictures of yourself drinking champagne at expensive restaurants. How exactly do you define doing something wrong? Jessica's face flushed. So this is about money? You're mad because I went out to lunch? This is about priorities, Jessica. It's about the fact that your mother's cancer diagnosis didn't even register as important enough to interrupt your social life. That's not fair. I was dealing with the news in my own way. Just because I didn't break down crying doesn't mean I don't care. How are you dealing with the news? By ignoring it completely? By not calling to check on me even once? By asking me to send you jewelry while I was fighting for my life? I asked for grandmother's pearls for one night. It's not like I was asking you to sell the house. The casual dismissal in her voice was breathtaking. Even now, she couldn't see why asking her dying mother for jewelry might be inappropriate. Do you want to know what I was doing while you were planning your gala outfit? I was sitting in a chemotherapy chair for 4 hours, watching other patients with their loving families, realizing that my own daughter couldn't be bothered to even call and ask how my treatment went. Mom, I'm sorry you felt alone, but you have to understand. No, Jessica. I don't have to understand anything. I've spent 38 years understanding, making excuses for you, putting your needs first. I'm done understanding. So you're just going to punish me financially? Take away money you've already given me? I'm taking back money I gave to someone I thought was my daughter. Someone I thought loved me enough to be there when I needed her most. You've proven that person doesn't exist. Jessica's expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like panic. Mom, you can't do this. I have obligations, payments on my car, my apartment lease. That money isn't just sitting in a savings account. I've planned my entire financial life around having it. Then maybe you should have planned your emotional life around having a mother who needed you. This is insane. You're destroying our relationship over nothing. What relationship? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about something you wanted from me? When was the last time you asked about my life, my feelings, my dreams? We don't have a relationship, Jessica. We have an arrangement where I give and you take. That's not true, isn't it? Name one thing you've done for me in the past 5 years that wasn't in response to a specific request. Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between us. I thought so, I said quietly. Mom, please, don't do this. I know I haven't been perfect, but I can change. I'll come to your next appointment. I'll help you more. Just don't take away the trust fund. And there it was. The offer to change, but only if she could keep the money. Even her promise to be a better daughter came with financial conditions attached. It's too late for that, Jessica. It's not too late. It's never too late. You're my mother. You're supposed to love me unconditionally. I do love you unconditionally. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. And I'm done enabling your selfishness. So what? You're just going to cut me out of your life? Your only daughter? You cut yourself out of my life. The day you decided your mother's cancer wasn't worth your time. Jessica stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. The dawning realization that her actions might actually have consequences she couldn't charm or manipulate her way out of. I hate you, she said, quietly. I know you do. Right now, you hate anyone who won't give you what you want. But someday, when you've grown up enough to understand what real love looks like, you might thank me for finally teaching you that your actions matter. She turned and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her drive away, then closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding but my resolve intact. This was what setting boundaries felt like. This was what self-respect looked like. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt, like surgery. Painful but necessary for healing. My phone rang almost immediately. Jessica again. I let it go to voicemail. It rang 6 more times over the next hour, but I didn't answer. Finally, she sent a text. This isn't over. You can't just throw away 38 years because you're having a midlife crisis. Midlife crisis. At 73, with cancer, I was apparently having a midlife crisis because I'd finally stopped accepting unacceptable behavior from my daughter. I turned off my phone and went to bed early, exhausted but oddly peaceful. Tomorrow would bring more angry calls, more accusations, probably more attempts to manipulate me into changing my mind. But for the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Because tomorrow, I would wake up as a woman who had finally learned that love without respect is worthless, that giving without limits creates takers, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach someone the consequences of their choices. Jessica would have 30 days to contest the trust fund revocation, 30 days to prove that she deserved the money I'd given her, 30 days to show that she could be the daughter I'd raised her to be, instead of the entitled stranger she'd become. I wasn't holding my breath. The silence that followed Jessica's departure felt different from the loneliness I'd grown accustomed to over the past months. This wasn't the hollow ache of abandonment. It was the profound quiet that comes after a storm, when the air finally clears and you can see the damage honestly for the first time. I stood in my living room, looking at the space where my daughter had stood just minutes before, and realized that the woman who had raised Jessica was gone forever. In her place stood someone I was still getting to know, someone who had finally learned the difference between love and enablement. Over the next 3 weeks, Jessica's campaign to reverse the trust fund revocation escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. The phone calls became relentless, sometimes 20 or 30 per day, cycling through rage, bargaining, tears, and threats. When I stopped answering, she began showing up at my house at all hours. When I refused to open the door, she started leaving handwritten letters on my porch, each one more desperate than the last. The letters told a story of their own, a progression, through the stages of someone finally facing consequences for the first time in their adult life. The early ones were full of righteous indignation and legal threats. I've consulted with 3 different attorneys, and they all say you can't revoke a trust fund without legitimate cause. Your hurt feelings don't constitute legal grounds. Another read, I'm documenting every instance of your erratic behavior. When this goes to court, I'll prove you're not mentally competent to make financial decisions. But as the days passed and her lawyers presumably explained the strength of the revocation clause, the tone shifted. The letters became more personal, more manipulative. Mom, I know I haven't been perfect, but destroying my financial security won't make you feel better about having cancer. This is just displaced anger at your diagnosis. And then, you always taught me to work hard and be independent. Now you're punishing me for the very qualities you instilled in me. The most revealing letter came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after she'd received the revocation papers. I found it wedged under my door when I returned from my 5th chemotherapy session, and despite my exhaustion from treatment, I felt compelled to read it immediately. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about me never calling just to check on you, and I realize you might be right. But you have to understand that I learned early that you didn't really want me to need you emotionally. You were always so focused on being strong, on handling everything yourself, on not being a burden to anyone. I thought that's what you wanted from me too. Independence, self-sufficiency, not needing help from others. Maybe I misunderstood what you needed from me. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. Please don't let this misunderstanding destroy everything we've built together. I read that letter 3 times, marveling at Jessica's ability to rewrite our entire history, to cast herself as the victim of my emotional unavailability. According to her version of events, I had somehow failed to communicate that I wanted a loving, caring relationship with my daughter. She'd interpreted my strength during difficult times as a signal that I didn't want her emotional support, rather than recognizing it as the sacrifice it actually was. A mother shouldering burdens so her child wouldn't have to. It was masterful. Manipulation, taking a grain of truth that I had tried to shield her from my struggles and twisting it into justification for 38 years of self-centeredness. Even now, faced with losing her financial safety net, she couldn't take genuine responsibility for her choices. I was folding the letter back into its envelope when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer. Mrs. Scott, this is David Chen, Dr. Patricia Chen's brother. She asked me to call you. I felt a flutter of concern. Is everything all right? Is there a problem with my treatment? No, nothing like that. I'm actually calling because Patricia mentioned your situation at home, and I wanted to reach out personally. You see, I'm a private investigator, and I specialize in cases involving financial fraud and family disputes. I'm not sure I understand. Mrs. Scott, Patricia told me about your daughter's behavior during your cancer treatment and about the trust fund you've revoked. She's concerned that you might not have the full picture of how that money has been used. Something cold settled in my stomach. What do you mean? Would it be possible for us to meet in person? There are some things I'd like to show you, documents that I think you should see before your daughter's 30-day response period expires. We arranged to meet the following afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. I spent the rest of that day wondering what David Chen might have discovered, alternating between dread and a strange anticipation. Part of me didn't want to know what Jessica had really been doing with the money I'd given her. But a larger part needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. David Chen turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his early 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked more like a college professor than a private investigator, which somehow made what he had to tell me even more unsettling. "Mrs. Scott, I want to start by saying that what I'm about to show you may be difficult to hear." Patricia asked me to look into your daughter's financial activities after you mentioned some concerns about her spending patterns. He opened a manila folder and spread several documents across the small table between us. Bank statements, credit card records, receipts, and what looked like loan applications. Your daughter received $470,000 from the trust fund 5 years ago, correct? Yes, though my attorney said there was still $430,000 left. That's accurate, but only because she's been using the remaining principal as collateral for increasingly large loans. She currently owes approximately $200,000 to various creditors, secured against the trust fund assets. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. $200,000? In debt? The spending accelerated dramatically. 18 months ago when she began dating Mark Hoffman. I believe you know him? I nodded, remembering Jessica's endless photos of expensive dinners and luxury vacations. Mr. Hoffman has some significant financial problems of his own. He's currently under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for possible insider trading violations. He's also been married twice before, both times to women with substantial inheritance or trust fund money. David slid another document across the table. This is a receipt from Cartier in Chicago, dated 6 weeks ago. Jessica purchased an engagement ring worth $47,000. I stared at the receipt, my hands trembling slightly. She bought her own engagement ring? It appears Mr. Hoffman convinced her that purchasing the ring herself was more modern and empowering than waiting for him to propose traditionally. She posted about it on social media as a symbol of her independence and financial success. More documents followed. Receipts for designer clothes, luxury handbags, jewelry and electronics, payments to high-end spas and exclusive gyms, travel, expenses for elaborate vacations to Europe and the Caribbean, a down payment on a beach house rental for an entire summer season. Mrs. Scott, your daughter has been living far beyond her means, even with the trust fund. She's been using the money not for security or investment, as you intended, but to maintain a lifestyle designed to impress a man who appears to be systematically manipulating her into bankruptcy. I felt nauseous, and not from chemotherapy. Side effects. How do you know all this? Some of it is public record. The rest came from social media posts, credit reports, and a few discreet inquiries. Your daughter has been remarkably open about her expenditures online. She seems to view extravagant spending as a form of personal branding. David pulled out his phone and showed me Jessica's Instagram account. I'd seen some of these photos before, but looking at them now through the lens of his investigation, they took on a different meaning. Each image wasn't just documentation of a luxurious lifestyle. It was evidence of financial recklessness funded by money I'd intended to provide her with security. There's something else, David said gently. Mr. Hoffman has been encouraging Jessica to pressure you for additional funds. I have screenshots of text message conversations where he suggests ways she might manipulate you into giving her more money. He showed me printouts of messages that made my blood run cold. Mark suggesting that Jessica play up my cancer diagnosis to extract sympathy and financial support from relatives. Mark coaching her on how to make me feel guilty for being selfish with money that could help their future together. Mark calculating how much my house was worth and discussing strategies for convincing me to take out a reverse mortgage to fund their lifestyle. He's been systematically isolating her from family and friends who might question their relationship, while encouraging increasingly risky financial decisions. This is a pattern I've seen before. Financial predators who target women with access to family money. I set the phone down with shaking hands. She doesn't know, does she? About his background, His other marriages? The SEC investigation? I doubt it. Men like Mr. Hoffman are skilled at presenting themselves as successful and trustworthy. By the time their victims realize the truth, they're often too financially and emotionally invested to walk away easily. The full scope of the situation was beginning to sink in. Jessica wasn't just a selfish daughter who had abandoned her. Mother during a health crisis, she was also being financially manipulated by a con artist who saw her trust fund as an opportunity. What happens when the trust fund money is gone? I asked. Based on the current spending rate and debt accumulation, that would happen within the next 18 to 24 months. At that point, Mr. Hoffman would likely disappear, leaving Jessica with massive debts and no way to pay them. David gathered the documents back into his folder. Mrs. Scott, I want to be clear about something. Your decision to revoke the trust fund was absolutely justified based on your daughter's behavior toward you during your illness, but it may also be the only thing that saves her from complete financial ruin. As I drove home from that meeting, my mind reeled with everything I'd learned. For months, I'd been focused on Jessica's emotional betrayal, her failure to support me during my cancer treatment. But the reality was even worse than I'd imagined. She wasn't just selfishly spending my money, she was being systematically manipulated into destroying her financial future by a man who saw her as nothing more than a mark. Part of me felt vindicated. The trust fund revocation wasn't just about teaching Jessica consequences for her treatment of me. It was about saving her from a predator she was too naive or infatuated to recognize. But another part of me felt a familiar stab of maternal protectiveness. Whatever Jessica had done to me, she didn't deserve to be financially and emotionally destroyed by someone like Mark Hoffman. That evening, I sat in my kitchen reviewing David's documents and trying to decide what to do with the information. I could show Jessica everything, try to open her eyes to Mark's manipulation, and hope she'd be grateful enough to repair our relationship. But I knew my daughter well enough to predict her response. She'd accuse me of hiring a private investigator to spy on her, dismiss the evidence as fabricated or exaggerated, and probably defend Mark even more fiercely. Or I could say nothing. Let the trust fund revocation stand and watch from a distance as Jessica slowly realized the truth about the man she'd been planning to marry. It would be painful for her, but it might be the only way she'd truly learn to recognize manipulation and make better choices in the future. My phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. Mom, Mark proposed. We're engaged. I know things have been difficult between us, but I really want you to be part of this celebration. Can we please talk? I stared at the message for a long time. Jessica was announcing her engagement to a man who was systematically destroying her financial future, using money I'd given her to pay for the ring he'd convinced her to buy herself. The layers of manipulation and self-deception were staggering. But something else struck me about the message. For the first time in weeks, Jessica was asking to talk rather than demanding. She was acknowledging that things had been difficult between us, rather than blaming me entirely for our estrangement. It was a small shift, but perhaps a significant one. I decided to test that shift. I called her number, and she answered immediately. Mom, thank you for calling. I was hoping... Jessica, I know about Mark. Silence. What do you mean? I know about his previous marriages, his financial problems, the SEC investigation. I know about the debt you've accumulated and the loans you've taken against your trust fund. I know he's been coaching you on how to manipulate me for more money. That's not true. Who told you that? It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that it's all documented, all provable. You're being financially manipulated by a con artist, and you're too infatuated to see it. Mom, you hired someone to spy on me? How could you do that? I didn't hire anyone to spy on you, Jessica. I had someone investigate the man who's been systematically destroying your financial future with your enthusiastic participation. Mark loves me. He wants to marry me. Just because you can't stand to see me happy doesn't mean he's some kind of criminal." The defensiveness in her voice was exactly what I'd expected, but it still made my heart ache. She was so determined to believe in Mark's love that she couldn't see the evidence of his manipulation, even when it was presented clearly. "Jessica, he convinced you to buy your own engagement ring. He's encouraged you to go into debt to fund a lifestyle you can't afford. He's been planning ways to get money out of me by exploiting my cancer diagnosis. Does any of that sound like love to you? You don't understand our relationship. Mark believes in equality, in partners contributing equally to their future together. The ring was a symbol of my independence and success. $47,000 of debt on a symbol of independence. Jessica, listen to yourself. I'm not going to let you destroy my happiness because you're bitter about your own life choices. Mark and I are building something beautiful together, and I won't let your jealousy ruin it." Jealousy. She thought I was jealous of her relationship with a man who was systematically robbing her blind. "Jessica, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, and then I'm going to hang up. Look at Mark's financial records. Really look at them. Look at his credit history, his previous relationships, his business dealings. Do your own research instead of just believing what he tells you." "I don't need to research the man I'm going to marry. I trust him." "Then you're going to lose everything, and when you do, don't expect me to bail you out. I wouldn't ask you for help anyway. You've made it clear that your love comes with conditions and expiration dates. My love doesn't have conditions, Jessica. My financial support does. Learn the difference." I hung up before she could respond. 3 days later, David Chen called with an update. "Mrs. Scott, I thought you should know that Mr. Hoffman has accelerated his timeline. Jessica applied for a personal loan yesterday, using her engagement to you as emotional leverage with the lender. She's also put her condo on the market." "She's selling her home?" "Apparently, Mr. Hoffman has convinced her that they need liquid capital to invest in his business ventures. She's planning to sell the condo and move in with him, combining their resources for what he's described as a major opportunity." I felt sick. How much would she get from selling the condo? "Approximately $300,000, minus what she still owes on the mortgage. Mr. Hoffman has been very specific about wanting access to those funds within the next 30 days. The same 30 days Jessica had to contest the trust fund revocation. The timing wasn't a coincidence. "David, what happens if I reinstate the trust fund?" Then she'd have access to the $400,000 remaining, plus whatever she gets from selling her home. Mr. Hoffman would likely convince her to invest everything in his schemes, and she'd be completely wiped out within 6 months. And if I don't reinstate it? She'll still have the money from selling her condo, but it won't be enough to satisfy Mr. Hoffman's plans long term. He might stay with her long enough to take whatever she has, but he'd probably start looking for his next target. Either way, Jessica was going to lose. The only question was how much. That night I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Jessica one more time. "Mom?" She sounded exhausted. "Jessica, I want you to come over tomorrow evening, alone. No Mark, no lawyers, no friends, just you." "Why?" "Because I have some things I need to show you, and some things I need to say. After tomorrow, whatever happens between us happens. But I want you to have all the information before you make decisions that will affect the rest of your life." There was a long pause. "What kind of information?" "The kind that might save you from making the biggest mistake of your life." "If this is another attempt to manipulate me..." "Jessica, I'm 73 years old with cancer. I don't have the energy or inclination to manipulate anyone. I'm offering you facts. Whether you choose to accept them or not is entirely up to you." Another pause. "What time?" 7 o'clock. Come alone or don't come at all." The next evening, Jessica arrived precisely at 7. She looked thinner than when I'd last seen her, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. The stress of our estrangement, combined with planning a wedding and selling her home, was clearly taking its toll. "Thank you for coming," I said, leading her into the living room. "I'm here because I'm hoping we can finally resolve this situation." "Like adults," she said, sitting on the edge of the sofa as if she might need to leave quickly. I handed her David Chen's folder without preamble. "Look through this. Take your time. Ask questions if you need clarification." Jessica opened the folder skeptically, but as she began reading, her expression changed. I watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and gradually, a dawning understanding that made my heart break for her. She spent 45 minutes going through every document, every receipt, every screenshot. When she finished, she sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the engagement ring on her finger. "You hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Mark," she said finally. "I had a private investigator verify information that was already publicly available. Nothing in that folder required any special access or secret investigation. Most of it came from your own social media posts and public records. But you went looking for reasons to hate him. Jessica, I went looking for the truth. The fact that the truth reflects poorly on Mark isn't my fault." She picked up the screenshots of Mark's text messages about manipulating me for money. "These could be fake." "They could be. Call the investigator and ask to see the originals. Better yet, ask Mark directly about his previous marriages and the SEC investigation." "You want me to accuse my fiancé of being a con artist based on some documents that might not even be real? I want you to do your own research before you sell your home and invest your life savings in a man you've known for 18 months. Jessica stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this." "No, you don't. You can walk out right now. Marry Mark, give him access to all your money, and find out the hard way whether those documents are accurate. That's your choice." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Why are you doing this? If you really think Mark is some kind of criminal, why didn't you just let me find out on my own? Why warn me?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself all day. Because despite everything that's happened between us, despite your behavior during my illness, despite the fact that you've shown me more disrespect in the past 6 months than I thought possible, you're still my daughter. And I love you enough to try to save you from destroying your life, even if you hate me for it. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I don't hate you, Mom. I'm just confused. Everything's been so complicated lately." "I know it has, and I know I haven't made it easier by revoking your trust fund. But Jessica, that money was meant to provide you with security, not to fund someone else's schemes. Mark isn't scheming. He loves me. Maybe he does. But love and financial manipulation aren't mutually exclusive. Someone can care about you and still make decisions that are destructive to your future." Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What am I supposed to do? We're getting married in 3 months. I've already sent invitations." "You're supposed to verify these documents independently. Talk to Mark about his financial history. Get a prenuptial agreement that protects your assets. Make sure you're making decisions based on facts rather than emotions. And if the documents are accurate, if Mark really is what you think he is, then you walk away before he can do any more damage to your life." Jessica gathered up the documents and put them back in the folder. "I need time to think." "Of course you do. Take all the time you need." She moved toward the door again, then turned back. "Mom, if it turns out you're right about Mark, will you consider reinstating the trust fund?" The question I'd been expecting. "Jessica, the trust fund was revoked because of how you treated me during my cancer diagnosis, not because of Mark. If you want to repair our relationship, it has to be about us, not about money. But if we could repair our relationship, Then we'd work on rebuilding trust, and trust takes time to develop. She nodded slowly. I understand. After Jessica left, I sat in my living room feeling emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. For the first time in months, we'd had a conversation that wasn't dominated by anger or accusations. She'd listened to difficult information without storming out. She'd asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely conflicted rather than simply defensive. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was progress. 2 weeks later, David Chen called with news I'd been both expecting and dreading. Mrs. Scott, Jessica broke off her engagement to Mr. Hoffman yesterday. She also took her condo off the market and filed a police report about financial fraud. What kind of fraud? Apparently, she discovered that Mr. Hoffman had been using her credit cards to make purchases without her knowledge. When she confronted him with the documents you'd shown her, he became verbally abusive and threatened to sue her for breach of promise if she didn't go through with the wedding. Is she all right? Physically, yes. Emotionally, I think she's struggling with the realization that her relationship was built on deception, but she's taking steps to protect herself legally. And financially, I felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Jessica had found the courage to end a destructive relationship before it could ruin her completely. Sadness that she'd had to learn such a painful lesson about trust and manipulation. My phone rang later that afternoon. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Mom? I'm here. I wanted to thank you for showing me those documents, for trying to protect me even when I was awful to you. You were right about Mark, about everything. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry too, and not just about Mark. I'm sorry about how I treated you when you told me about your cancer. I'm sorry I wasn't there for your treatments. I'm sorry I spent so much time thinking about myself that I forgot you might need something from me for once. The apology I'd been waiting months to hear, delivered with a sincerity that made my eyes fill with tears. I accept your apology, Jessica. Is it too late to fix things between us? It's not too late, but rebuilding trust takes time, and it requires consistent actions, not just words. I understand. And Mom? I know you revoked the trust fund because of how I behaved, not because of Mark. I'm not asking you to reinstate it. I just want the chance to earn back your respect. You already have it, Jessica. The fact that you walked away from Mark when you learned the truth, the fact that you're taking responsibility for your mistakes, that's exactly the kind of character I always hoped you'd develop. I love you, Mom. I love you too. The conversation that followed was different from any we'd had in years. Jessica told me about the signs she'd ignored in her relationship with Mark, the red flags she'd rationalized away, because she'd wanted so desperately to believe she'd found someone who loved her. I told her about my cancer treatment, about the fear and loneliness I'd experienced, about the families I'd observed who supported each other through crisis. We talked for over 2 hours, and when we finally hung up, I felt like I'd gotten my daughter back. Not the entitled, manipulative woman who had abandoned me during my illness, but the thoughtful, caring person I'd always believed she could become. 3 months later, Jessica had established new boundaries in her life and was slowly rebuilding her financial security. She'd found a new apartment within her actual means, had started therapy to understand how she'd become vulnerable to manipulation, and was making regular payments on the debts she'd accumulated during her relationship with Mark. She also started attending my chemotherapy sessions. The first time she showed up at the treatment center, I barely recognized her. Gone were the designer clothes and expensive accessories, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that actually looked comfortable rather than calculated to impress. She brought homemade soup, magazines, and a photo album of family pictures I hadn't seen in years. I thought you might like to look through these during treatment, she said, settling into the chair next to mine. I found them when I was packing up Mark's things from my apartment. We spent that treatment session looking through photos of Jessica's childhood, remembering birthday parties and school plays and family vacations. Other patients smiled at us as they passed, recognizing the joy of a family reunited. "Mom," Jessica said quietly as the chemotherapy drugs dripped into my IV, "I know I can't undo the damage I did to our relationship, but I want you to know that I finally understand what you tried to teach me all those years." "What's that?" "That love isn't about what someone can give you. It's about what you're willing to give them, especially when it's difficult." I squeezed her hand, feeling tears I didn't try to hide. It took me 73 years and a cancer diagnosis to learn that lesson myself. Jessica continued to come to my treatments, and gradually, we rebuilt something that was stronger than what we'd had before. Not the relationship between an enabling mother and an entitled daughter, but a partnership between two adults who had learned to respect each other's boundaries and needs. 6 months after my diagnosis, Dr. Chen delivered news that felt like a miracle. The cancer was responding better than expected to treatment. The tumor had shrunk significantly, and surgery was now a viable option that could potentially eliminate the remaining cancer cells. I called Jessica with the news, and she cried with relief and joy. "Mom, this is incredible. When is the surgery?" "Scheduled." "Next month. Dr. Chen says the recovery will be challenging, probably 6 to 8 weeks of limited activity. I'll take time off work to help you recover." The offer I desperately wanted to hear months earlier, now given freely, without conditions or expectations. "You don't have to do that, Jessica. I know your career is important." "My career will always be there, Mom. You won't. And I've learned that some things are more important than impressing clients or climbing corporate ladders." As I prepared for surgery, I reflected on everything that had happened since my diagnosis. The cancer had indeed been clarifying, but not in the way I'd initially expected. It hadn't just shown me who Jessica really was, it had forced both of us to confront the dysfunctional patterns we'd established over decades. My unconditional giving had enabled Jessica's selfishness, but her crisis with Mark had taught her to value genuine love over financial security. My decision to revoke her trust fund had initially seemed like punishment, but it had ultimately saved her from financial ruin and forced her to develop the character I'd always hoped she possessed. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes saying no is more valuable than saying yes. Sometimes the relationships worth saving are the ones that can survive honest confrontation and difficult truths. The day before my surgery, Jessica brought me a gift. A small framed photograph of the two of us from her college graduation, the same photo that had been on my nightstand throughout my chemotherapy treatments. "I found this in a box of things I'd stored away," she said. "I remember how proud you looked that day, how happy you were about my achievements. I want you to know that I'm just as proud of you now." "Proud of me? For what?" "For teaching me that love requires courage. For showing me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's bad behavior. For loving me enough to let me fail so I could learn to succeed on my own terms." I looked at the photograph, remembering that younger version of myself who had been so certain that giving Jessica everything would ensure her happiness. That woman had meant well, but she'd been wrong about so many things. The woman I'd become was different, stronger, more selective about where she invested her love and energy, more willing to demand respect alongside affection. The surgery was successful. Dr. Chen removed the remaining tumor with clear margins, and my recovery progressed better than anyone had expected. Jessica took 6 weeks off work to help me recuperate, cooking meals, managing medications, and driving me to follow-up appointments. During those weeks of recovery, we had the kinds of conversations I'd dreamed of having with my daughter for years. We talked about her childhood, about the mistakes we'd both made, about the future we wanted to build together. She told me about her therapy sessions and the insights she was gaining about healthy relationships. I told her about the peace I'd found in finally setting boundaries and demanding respect. One afternoon, as I was regaining my strength after surgery, Jessica brought up the trust fund. Mom, I've been thinking about the money you revoked. I understand why you did it, and I agree with your decision. But I want you to know that I don't expect you to reinstate it. I'm learning to live within my means, and it feels good to know. I'm supporting myself honestly. What would you do if I offered to reinstate it? She considered the question seriously. I'd probably ask you to donate it instead. To the cancer center, or to a program that helps patients who don't have family support. I think that money could do more good helping other people than it ever did funding my shopping habits. I smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her suggestion. That's exactly what I've been planning to do. 6 months later, at a ceremony at Riverside Cancer Treatment Center, Jessica and I presented a check for $400,000 to establish the Family Support Fund, a program providing practical assistance to cancer patients who lack family support during treatment, transportation, meal delivery, home health services, and companion care during chemotherapy sessions. Dorothy and her daughter Sarah were there for the ceremony, along with other families I'd met during my treatment. As I watched the joy on their faces, I realized that something beautiful had emerged from one of the darkest periods of my life. The money I'd given Jessica as a misguided attempt to buy her love and security had ultimately been transformed into genuine security for people who needed it most. The daughter I'd raised to be dependent and entitled had become independent and generous. The relationship I'd thought was destroyed by cancer had been healed and strengthened through honest confrontation and mutual respect. Jessica stood beside me as we handed over the check, her arm around my shoulders, her face glowing with genuine pride and happiness. This was the woman I'd always hoped she would become, not because I'd enabled her to avoid consequences, but because I'd finally loved her enough to let her face them. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered as cameras flashed around us, "for teaching me what real love looks like." Looking back now, I can see that cancer gave me 2 gifts I never expected. The first was the clarity to recognize that my relationship with Jessica was built on dysfunction rather than genuine love. The second was the courage to do something about it, even when it meant risking our relationship entirely. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is your own child. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is the opportunity to face consequences and grow from them. Sometimes walking away from what feels like love is the only way to find what love actually means. Jessica and I have been cancer-free and manipulation-free for 2 years now. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's honest. She calls me regularly, not because she wants something, but because she genuinely cares about my life. She visits not out of obligation, but out of love. She gives back not because she has to, but because she wants to. The woman who once spent $47,000 on an engagement ring she bought herself now volunteers at the cancer center every weekend, helping other patients navigate their treatments. The daughter who once abandoned her mother during chemotherapy now advocates for family support programs at hospitals throughout the state. People sometimes ask me if I regret revoking Jessica's trust fund, if I think I was too harsh during one of the most difficult periods of both our lives. But when I see who she's become, confident, compassionate, genuinely successful rather than artificially propped up by money she didn't earn, I know I made the right choice. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. Giving without limits doesn't create gratitude, it creates entitlement. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone you care about is to stop rescuing them from the consequences of their own choices. My cancer taught me that life is too short to waste on relationships that drain rather than sustain you, too precious to spend enabling behavior that hurts everyone involved. But it also taught me that it's never too late to change course. Never. Too late to demand better. Never too late to transform dysfunction into health. The trust fund is gone, spent on helping other families navigate cancer together. But what Jessica and I have now is worth far more than any amount of money. A relationship built on mutual respect, honest communication, and love that's been tested by crisis and emerged stronger than before. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to discover what's actually worth keeping. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the chance to earn what they've been taking for granted. And sometimes, when you finally stop giving people what they want and start giving them what they need, everyone ends up better than they were before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.